Welcome, everyone. Today is another Friday Forum. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I am very glad to be your host for these Friday Forums. We do them about every other week, depending on what's going on in the world and with the pandemic and everything else. And my goal is to talk to subject matter experts in subjects that matter to you. So we cover financial, admissions, business, all those things that we're all dealing with. So I'm very pleased to have with me today two of the finest, Jeff Levy and Jennie Kent, and they have been doing college and consulting in many different countries and for many years. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome, Jennie. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Oh, you can, for sure. So we're going to have everyone tell us, so you can see we've got over 80 people and people are still logging in. So as you log in, use the chat box and let's let Jennie and Jeff know where you're from. You put your name and this way you all can see where you're from as well. So we really enjoy having people here. I see Amardeep. I know it's like probably 7 a.m. your time, or I guess your afternoon. It's my morning. So we have people from Hawaii, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon. We've been thinking about you. We know
Whidbey Island, one of my favorite places.
So Fremont, Madison, Heather, she was just in my spring UCLA class. So those of you that were in the UCLA program, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Cincinnati, love Cincinnati. My daughter went to school there too. So you can see, Jennie and Jeff, we have people from all over the world. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Jennie, you're a global citizen. Jeff, you've had so many vast experiences. Let's introduce yourselves a little bit and tell them a little bit about yourselves. And then we'll talk more about data and trends and, just what we're seeing. So Jennie, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you. My name is Jennie Kent. I am usually based out of Bogota, Colombia, part of the year, and Stonington, Connecticut. I've actually been in Stonington during the pandemic. I got stuck here, borders closed. So this is the longest period of time that I have been in the United States in almost 30 years. And I consult both for boarding school and for university admissions. Jeff?
And I'm Jeff.
That's all I got.
I was waiting for more. There's a lot more there, folks, just so you know. My name is Jeff Levy. I've been an educational consultant for about 12 or 13 years. I'm based in Santa Monica, California. And before this, I spent close to 3 decades in the film and television industry, which had nothing to do with educational consulting or financial aid. I'm the last person I thought would ever become knowledgeable about either one of those fields, but things have a strange way of working themselves out. Very good to be here.
So tell us about, you started a few years ago putting together data. What prompted you to do that? Why was that important for both of you to do? Many of us have benefited from that. You've posted that to NACAC and other things. So what was the impetus for you guys to start that?
Do you want to go first?
Well, the origin story actually starts with Jennie, who advising international students. There had been a kind of list of institutions that were giving financial aid to international applicants, but it had not really been well curated. It was incomplete, but it was the only one out there. And I think Jennie felt she knew that I was interested in financial aid. So together, that became our first chart, was combing the common data sets, to find those schools that do give need-based or merit or both to international applicants.
Yeah, I would say, Cyndy, I just found when I started consulting that financial aid for international students was terribly mysterious. And I couldn't imagine that it needed to be that mysterious. So the list that existed was one that Doug Thompson put together. And it was a good list. He had just hadn't put it out in a few years, and I needed it. And, I had met Jeff, and I knew that, he knew a lot about financial aid. And so we partnered on that. And then we went domestic. And then
exactly. Then I got, as the consultant who was working with domestic applicants, what about us? So the following year, we worked on a financial aid chart for domestic students. And we both find them and we did them because we couldn't do our work without them. How do you know which are the schools that are most generous with need-based aid? How do you know which are the schools that are most generous with merit aid? I was at the point where I couldn't really recommend a good list of colleges to my students without having something aggregated like that. And that's why we did it.
So you've been doing this for a number of years. So you've been watching the trends and patterns, and you've been working with families. So this year with the pandemic, what is different? How are families behaving differently for this year?
You want me to start? Okay, I never know who's going to start. I think for me, I do work with domestic students, but the majority of my students are international. I'm seeing a real trend in kind of insisting on, if I'm not going to get into a prestigious university, I'm not going to go. So many students' lists terrify me. It's basically all reach and uber reach. But they really
aspirational, as we
extremely, extremely aspirational. Yes. And
aspirational.
Yeah. And I can understand it because really for international families, the names of institutions that are kind of known there's very few, and it's a tremendous financial investment, especially right now. Obviously, with the pandemic, there are other concerns. We've had economic downturns pretty much everywhere, currency fluctuations, so families say, listen, if they can get in and we feel like this is an investment worth making, we will. There's obviously widespread anxiety about testing, lots of confusion about there. I actually just got a text yesterday from a student who had met with the president of an alumni association of an institution in the Northeast. And she was terrified because she felt that he implied that she was just being lazy, not submitting her test scores this year. And she said, I kept trying to explain to him, I literally can't take the test. There's just a lot of anxiety everywhere. Jeff, what do you have to add? What's going on the West Coast?
Well, there's a lot of financial anxiety around. A lot of my families have seen a drop in income in 2020 as compared to 2019. So they know enough that their current high school seniors who are going to be applying to college right now, if they're applying for financial aid, they're going to be looking at the financial aid offices will be looking at their 2019 income and tax returns. But a lot of them have suffered a drop in 2020 and don't even know for sure what 2021 is going to look like. So I'm seeing a lot more questions this year about what do we do about that? Is it worth bringing this to the attention of the financial aid offices? Should we not say anything about it? I'm seeing a lot more of that this year.
And that creates a lot of uncertainty, not only for the students and their families, but there's a lot of uncertainty on the college side too. So have you heard, I mean, we've had a lot of college conferences, webinars, things like that. What are you hearing in that on that other side?
I think parents want to know what's going to be different with this, in the next cycle in terms of admissibility, in terms of affordability. And we don't have many answers around that. And the admissions folks don't have many answers about those questions. I mean, we can, if you want, Cyndy, we can dig into some of them a little more deeply in a moment.
Yeah, we will.
But in terms of financial aid, my feeling is that 50, 60 institutions will be fine and will not change their financial aid behavior at all, because they can weather, they're wealthy enough to weather this, and there's no drop in enrollment at those schools. So no problem for them. But there may be some around the edges, the smaller regional liberal arts colleges, who frankly for some years have been struggling to stay solvent. They may be hurting in deeper ways as a result of this year than before. But it's impossible to, some of those may even be giving higher merit aid awards just to try to attract enrollees. So we have no way of outthinking them at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to what Jenny was saying too. Those aren't the schools that are on those lists, right? Because they're not that prestigious school that the students are saying either I want to go to this prestigious one, or I'm not leaving the country at all.
Well, and I think one of the things that I really love about building these resources every year, because we do it by hand, and we're, digging in, it's very apparent to us, there are institutions that jump out that, you feel like they could be bleeding a little bit, because we're seeing increased amounts of merit every year, which seems sort of like a Hail Mary pass a little bit. So definitely we're noticing those things.
So let's talk about those. So because we're also doing this as a podcast, what's your website and where can people go to get these documents? And I see, Jenny, you posted in the chat. So those of you who didn't see it in the chat, it's there. But
Jeff just posted it again.
As usual, Jenny's about 5 minutes ahead of me.
Jeff posted, so you have it both times. But
so,
for those of our audiences,
it's at www.bigjeducationalconsulting.com, and you click on resources. And you'll see the three different charts there, the 2 financial aid charts and the most popular chart, which is the early decision chart.
So
yeah, which compares specifically early decision acceptance rates to regular decision acceptance rates, and also tells you what percentage of the class is filled from early decision. So I think there are
that's such a crucial thing to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing if it's 15%, it's another thing if it's 85%. So what are some trends or patterns that you've noticed especially in that early decision area?
Well, in preparation, Cyndy, for this talk, we did crunch some numbers a few days ago. We, of course, don't have any data from this year's entering freshman class that we're going to be publishing next August. We publish the beginning of every August. But we did look to see trends from across 2018, 2017, 2018, and 2019 entering classes. Can I spend a moment kind of going through those?
Sure, please do. Yeah.
So ED acceptance rates across those years, average nationally, didn't budge. They're at surprisingly high, much higher than I thought they would be, about 58, 59% average across the country ED acceptance rate. Percent of class filled, around 30, it was 29 point something in 17 and 18. And then in 2019's class, ticked up to 31.5%. I don't know if that's significant. Now, the two areas that have ticked up, have trended up noticeably, the number of schools using ED2 and the number of schools using EA2. When we started, Jenny and I mean, our first chart, I think, had 2 schools that used early action 2, meaning they have early action 1 and then a second early action. And now we found 25 of them in this last chart that we published. So those
So within 3 years, it went from 2 to 25.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the sorts of things when we're working, things will kind of jump out and we'll be like, well, we noticed that. Let's dig in a little bit deeper. I think, many colleges are going to offer any type of admission plan that they need to. They're really just, let's get the students to us any which way.
Well, Jenny, you were saying you were at a webinar that University of Chicago was speaking at, and they said, oh yeah, we've got all kinds of ways that students can apply. We make it easy for students to apply to University of Chicago. I think they've got everything, right? ED1, ED2, do they also have EA at Chicago?
I don't remember off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I think they do.
And so what about the ED? So you said the number of EA has increased. What about ED2?
So that in 2017's entering class, 85 schools had ED2. 2018's entering class, 92 had it. In 2019's entering class, 111. And I'm willing to bet it's going to be higher than that, with next year's data. That's just going up and up.
Mm-hmm. So what about the REA? Have you seen any data on that? Or is that, there's so few schools that offer it. And now this year it's being dropped. I don't know if all the schools have dropped it yet, but I know several have.
Yeah, that's always kind of just tucked in at the bottom of our chart. And I have to admit, I don't look at it that much. Those schools have such low admissibility rates anyway. I personally don't find it terribly helpful. It's almost impossible to get in every year.
This may be a good moment, Jenny and Cyndy, to mention, there's a real important caveat about our ED chart. And that's, if you notice that a school has 3 times the acceptance rate for ED than they do for RD, it's very important to know that that doesn't mean that any individual applying ED will have a 3 times easier chance of getting in. And here's why. And this also applies to the REA schools like Harvard and Stanford. If you are a recruited athlete, you have to apply during the ED or REA round. And the figure I heard, I can't verify this, but the figure I heard, recruited athletes at Harvard get admitted at 80%, at an acceptance rate of 80% if they're recruited. So that is going to drive up the acceptance rate of that ED cohort. And if you're not an athlete, if you're not legacy, and if you're, not this extraordinary person, from some foreign country who started his own or her own micro financing company, you may have an advantage, but you're not going to have the same 3 times advantage that it may appear you have.
Right. So it looks like Julie says Notre Dame still has REA. So, so what about summer melt? Like, how do you see that affecting some of these issues, especially this year. We're going to see that a lot, I think. What are your thoughts on summer melt and students who were admitted but might not be on campus now or in September?
Yeah, I think we don't have a lot of hard data on this. We really tried to dig into it because we're seeing this as a real area of anxiety for families. I feel like so many parents think there aren't going to be any spots left, for their student. I was on a webinar with the UK where, a pretty prestigious Russell Group university said it doubled for them, but it's such a small percentage that it really just doesn't make a difference at all. Chicago, on a webinar I was on a couple days ago, it was Jeffrey Salingo's webinar, said it's just not going to be an issue at all. And the admission director there suggested that, some schools may wind up accepting more students because they're worried about yield. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone really knows. I know in the UK, they were feeling like it was going to be a bigger issue, possibly the students who applied were accepted, but then kind of didn't know what to do because of the pandemic, maybe wanted to stay closer to home, some kind of just like dropped out of the process. And so they're wondering if there'll be a surge in applications next year. But I think we don't know. And I don't know, I've lived in multiple countries, and I have to say I've really learned to be flexible over the years. And I think, I look at this pandemic and I'm like, we're just going to do this 1 week at a time. We don't know. I'm not going to get stressed out over something I have no control over. It's going to be what it is. And I think students are just really well served to work really hard and be the best versions of themselves.
I think people are really surprised. I know a lot of my students at UCLA are surprised that there is even such a thing as summer melt, because the conception is students commit on May 1 when they say this is what we're going to do, that's what they do. But there may be financial aid, there may be family situations, they may, especially now with the pandemic, a lot of students and families are getting cold feet. They may have been planning on going far away to another country, and now they're more inclined to stay close to home. And so all of that contributes to summer melt. And then it also creates a domino effect, right? So I remember being at a WACAC conference one year, and this was in June, and I was talking with a director of admissions at one of the University of California, and he was on the phone, and he was saying, well, then pull these people off the wait list. Like, you're still pulling people off the wait list in June? Yeah, if people are if they're at UC Berkeley, UCLA are pulling off, then that trickles down to us, and then our people go there, and then we have to pull from our wait list. And so, the wait lists are a way of handling and managing that summer melt. And I talked to another admissions person. She said they would pull people off the wait list even the week the school started, as late as that.
Anecdotally, for my class that has just started their freshman year of college, mm-hmm. I saw a lot more wait list movement this year than I had ever seen before. Happily, a number of my students got into their first choice schools off the wait list that they were just like Hail Marys, some of those applications to those schools. I think for that class, this past year was a real anomaly, but I do think that wait lists are going to be larger next year than ever. And I don't have any proof of that. I haven't heard an admissions person say that. But I would be surprised if they weren't larger than ever. And I'm not sure there will be as much movement next cycle as there was for this cycle. But in the end, it's not, one institution's behavior may be very different from another institution's, and they can't even predict what's going to happen. So we certainly can't.
Yeah, and internationally, I've had a lot of students who were supposed to be entering freshmen and couldn't get to their campuses. Colombia's border, it's closed, and it's been closed for months, and some consulates around the world have started opening up. I know that, one of my students' roommates who's from Australia, by the time they were going to be able to get their visa and get here, it was going to be mid-October. And so they said, well, the parents said, why bother if you're going to send them home at Thanksgiving?
Right.
So I just think it's a bit nuts this year.
Well, I think that's the key thing. And I think it goes back to what you were saying before too, Jenny, is that, you just have to take it, a week or a month at a time. And, we have all these college campuses that have started on, students on campus, and, and they're still having to deal with.
That's going well.
Yeah, and others who didn't open their campuses are actually able to over-enroll now because students are home. So there is so much fluctuation. I don't think we can outthink it.
So Elizabeth asked the question, do you anticipate ED being required or more widely of applicants from the highly selected majors? Because
I didn't understand what she meant by ED it's not that I'm aware of. It's not ever required. If you want to bump, if your legacy, you probably should apply ED, and coaches are going to let their recruits know that, if you want a spot on my team, you show us you love us by, by applying ED. But I'm not aware of, maybe I'm not understanding.
I think you're maybe taking her question too literally.
I've been known to do that.
I think what she's asking is, if you're applying to a competitive major, is it going to make more sense for you? Is it almost going to be required of you to apply ED?
It's a perfectly fair interpretation of the question.
I haven't thought about that.
But see, and then that's the whole issue of the ED versus EA versus regular decision when you're looking at scholarships is, are the scholarships going to go with it? And can a family, if you do ED, then can you afford that? And is it only for the families that can really afford it to be able to do that? I have very few families that can afford to pay the whole bill of a college education without some kind of need or merit-based scholarship. So
well, you're in the Central Valley.
I am.
I think colleges use ED very strategically to meet their own institutional needs. Now, we don't know exactly what that means at each college. It may mean that they want to get in more. They want to know that they're getting enough full pay applicants. So they may over admit, or they may, selectively admit a lot more of those in ED. They may decide, what, our classics department is about to go under if we don't get more class. And if you're a classics major applying ED, they may grab you. So I think they use ED to kind of fill some holes that they can't predict they're going to be able to fill from the regular decision round. I think if you're full pay, next cycle, if you're full pay and you're applying ED in majors that are a little more exotic and not computer science or engineering or business, and you are a great fit statistically for that school, I think it will give you an advantage.
And I suspect that what we're going to see is a larger percent of class filled in ED next year, and if I worked in an admission office, I'd do the same thing. I would need to lock in my budget. And, when you look at the chart, those are some numbers where there's some real movement every year. There are schools on there that are admitting more than 70% of their class ED. So what's left?
Right. So then when you're applying regular, you've got you have maybe a larger pool of students that are applying for that, 30% of the class that's left. And those are going to be the students that are stand out in other ways in those, unusual majors, or, are your bassoon players or whatever other things that they're going to bring, right? So, so what about gap year? We've talked and heard a lot, and there's been a lot written about gap years and how a lot of students, especially this year, might have chosen to do gap years, and whether colleges offered that as an option. Some colleges were expanding that. Some were actually, decreasing the amount of gap years that they approved or, gave students permission to do. So, how do you see that? What do you see that for this year? Like, as students are going ahead, is gap year going to be more popular? And they can't go do the traditional things they would for gap year. So that's another issue too.
Yeah. I mean, philosophically, I'm a big supporter of gap year. I wish more students would do it. But right now, I mean, I think there are enormous challenges in doing it. So I mean, unless you have a great plan for something you want to do and it's going to be possible, I think there are real challenges. I was surprised in the last few months during COVID, listening to a lot of admission reps. I was surprised at how many institutions, particularly the large public institutions, don't grant gap year. I wasn't aware of that. So I think University of Delaware may have been one of them. The UCs also,
Yeah,
some of the UCs. Unless there is a pressing religious reason or medical reason, a lot of them will just say, sorry, we're not granting you a deferral. I think the attitude among the private liberal arts colleges is much more flexible.
Yeah, I can say a lot of my international students were very nervous about gap years because they felt that was, this year they couldn't get to campus. So the obvious thing would be to request, a deferral to take a gap. And, as I said to a student, I mean, you literally can't get to campus. I think everyone's going to be understanding. And they were, I didn't have a single student who applied for a gap that wasn't approved.
That makes difference. So Diana's asking, so do you recommend students make the effort to apply ED or EA rather than regular decision? And then Deborah talks about a student at NYU, her parents have an EFC of $40K a year. Should she apply ED and hope?
Not to NYU.
I know.
I would love to respond to that, but Jenny, do you want to respond to the first one?
I've already forgotten what the first one was.
Just strategies. Do you apply to EA?
Oh, ED. And then, I am so tired of the pressure being put on students. I'm exhausted by it. When I think back to when I was in high school and I went to, a pretty well-respected boarding school, and there was just never this type of academic pressure. And, I feel like students are 17 years old and they feel as if they have to figure out their whole life. And I'm really tired of it. So, for some students, I think ED makes a lot of sense, when you know what you want, when you have the money sitting there. But, for the majority of my students, it doesn't make sense.
They don't even know what they want to major in. So,
or if they do, it's going to change, right?
Right.
I should hope so. I changed my major my last semester.
To the question about NYU and the 40K EFC, this is a great question that I would love to speak to. It's really important that if a family has done the due diligence of learning what their EFC is early in the process, which is great that they've done that. And if they learn that their EFC is $30,000, $40,000, that's going to leave them with $40,000 worth of need at NYU. So that family should be looking, that's a lot of need. at NYU or any school that costs $75,000 or $80,000 a year. That family must be looking for schools that are meeting close to full need or are ridiculously generous with merit aid and can fill in the gap with that. NYU is not good for either. They don't come close to meeting full need, and they barely give any merit aid. It would be, in my opinion, a big mistake for a family with that kind of EFC to be applying in any round to NYU, because they won't be able to afford it, let alone ED, where you have a binding contract that you can get out of, but it's really ugly once you get out of it, because you don't know, your child doesn't know which other schools she will be admitted to and what their financial aid awards are going to be. So you don't want to play that game.
And that's what Swati says too. She's like, the problem with ED is you don't get the chance to compare. And a lot of times by applying regular decision, then you're able to compare what different schools have offered you and what's going, it's not a matter of this is my dream school versus all the others. It's like, which one is going to be most affordable? And if you do ED, you don't get that option. So Jeff, explain more about gapping. You used a term that people may or may not know what that means. So explain a little bit more about what does it mean to gap. NYU gaps. There are a lot of schools that will gap. California state universities, I notoriously talk to my families because if they qualify for need-based aid, they're either going to get the federal, the state, or they're going to get loans from from CSU. So because there's always a gap there. What does that mean?
Gapping means that the financial aid award leaves a gap between what your need is at that school and the sum total of the financial aid award. So unless your school is meeting full need or close to full need, by definition, you will get gapped. NYU meets on average for all its undergraduates 64% of need. There may be some outliers who are getting decent financial aid awards there, but for every outlier there's someone who's getting gapped even more than 64%. So gapping is not such a problem if you've got $5,000 of need at a school, if your EFC is 60,000 or 65,000. So you're only getting 60 or 70% of $5,000 instead of 100%. But if you've got $40,000 of need at a school and you're getting gapped by 40% of that, that means that you've got to not only come up with the 40 grand a year, which is usually impossible to come up with, but an additional 40% more. So these are the families who go into really tragic debt to try to make their child's college education affordable.
To make their dream come true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then colleges will advocate or recommend, they give them a financial aid package, but it includes parent loans for the whole difference. So you'll see students who have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in parent loans because the difference between what the student qualifies for and what the parent family contribution is what they can qualify for parent loans, and the parents can borrow that money too. That's their EFC. So they can borrow the $40,000 for EFC and another $40,000 for the gap. All of a sudden, then they're.
And I just want to qualify. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. That's fine.
I just want to clarify that student loan. Cyndy was just talking about parent loans.
Right.
Federal student loans are routinely included in the financial aid award.
Yep.
Kind of counterintuitively, money that you have to pay back with interest is part of the student's financial aid award. But what Cyndy was talking about is some schools, and I think it's a practice that should be abolished, are also kind of including a parent loan to show the parents that, oh, you only have this much to pay, not only after the student loan, but after a hefty parent loan as well. Parents need to know that Parent Plus loans are available to them, but they shouldn't be confused into thinking it's part of a financial aid award.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's why it's so important for them when they compare packages from different colleges to compare types too. It's not the total amount because it can be very misleading. You have to break it down. How much is grants? How much is scholarships? How much do we have to pay back? You know, how much is work study, things like that. And most of us know that. And most of us point those out to the families because they don't know. You know, I had twins one year came in and the mom was so excited and they applied to 2 different schools. Well, my daughter got so much more than my son over here. I'm like, yeah, when we compared it, he had a much better deal than she did because this other college made it look, because of student loans and parent loans, look like a lot more. And they were just looking at the bottom line. Well, that's not what you want to do. You want to divide it out and compare all the different. So how do you, in your data, can you tell like which ones are giving more merit award or not merit award? How does that reflected in the data and the trends that you guys have seen?
Well, I think it kind of depends on our methodology. We had a different approach this year to making the charts where we literally did it together the entire time, which was really helpful because before we sometimes split it up. And so, you know, I might catch something or Jeff might catch something, but this year we were kind of talking through each set of data as we entered it. So there were definitely, you know, things that would jump out, and we, you know, we kind of play games, you know, where, you know, I'll say, do you want to guess on this next one, what the percentage of students getting merit aid is? Or, you know, there are schools that jumped out at us for having very wealthy students. There were schools that jumped out at us that seemed to be offering more merit. With the international, of course, I always notice if it's, what tends to happen, I think, with the international students, at least what I think we've noticed is the amount of total money allocated is usually pretty similar. It's just broken up different ways. Some years it's less students and larger awards. Other years it's more students and less awards.
So do you think colleges, and this is a question that was in the chat too, do you think that they're looking for more international students or out-of-state students in order to bump up those revenue because they don't offer as much scholarships for those students?
I think it's a pretty good year to be a full pay international student. Yes, I do. I think this year is tricky, but hopefully by next year, you know, if we have a vaccine and if everything is working well, you know, and students can get to campus, you know, I think for sure we're going to see, you know, an uptick in admissibility.
What about an international student who's not full pay?
You know, there are definitely universities that value international students. I think College of Worcester is a perfect example. They are thrilled to have international students on their campus. And that's an institution that I feel is really committed to that, to bringing international students to campus. And I'd be really surprised if that changed anytime soon. And I think, you know, obviously the publics are the ones that historically offer less. And I assume they're going to offer less. And I think unless you're, you know, like Rhode Island, where I'm from, or Vermont, where there's just so few students to fill the seats and they're actively recruiting out-of-state students and offering specific scholarships for them, you know, I think states are going to take care of their own kids.
And I'll add to that in a state like California, where there's a lot of social pressure to admit more in-state kids, mm-hmm. I think there's a limit to how many out-of-state. I think they want to admit out-of-state kids, but I think there's a limit to how many they can because of the social blowback.
Yeah. I think that, and a lot more states are finding that too. So Elizabeth asked, do you feel college tuitions can be lowered? I see some colleges have done this if instruction is remote and, you know, what kind of trends or things have you, this isn't in the data as much, but just in, anecdotal evidence or articles that are coming out, reports that are coming out. So
What I'm seeing is that colleges by and large are not lowering their tuition, and their rationale is we're actually spending more money now to transition to online or hybrid learning. We're not getting the revenue from the housing revenue, the meal revenue. So they're experiencing financial aid pressures. I'm not crying for them, but the reality is they are experiencing financial aid pressures as well. So I think I think it's best not to expect that tuitions are going to come down.
Yeah, this is the first year, I can't remember off the top of my head, I don't know if Jeff does, that we saw a college with a cost of attendance over 80,000 a year when we were filling out the chart. Tuitions aren't lowering. I think, there's nothing like a global pandemic to really make the value of a residential college experience apparent.
yeah,
I think a lot of people who were balking before are saying like, oh, wow, like, yeah, this is a really great, valuable experience. But yeah, I feel like anecdotally, and I can't remember which one, I've seen some colleges freeze at last year's and not bump up, but like a handful.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And, if somebody is reducing tuition, Karen asks, is that an indication of financial difficulty for college? I don't think necessarily.
I won't be able to pull up the link right now, but a really good book came out called The College Stress Test. And it has I don't know what you call it, like an interactive guide to how to check the health of a college. And it's the one that so far that I've seen that I like and respect. I forget the name of that. Maybe someone who's watching can, yes. It's in the Hetchinger report, and I forget what that methodology is that they use. But I wouldn't say that if a college lowers its tuition, it's a sign of, they're in financial trouble. But Jenny and I are not experts on this for sure, but sometimes we see that the admission rate, the acceptance rate has been creeping up year after year. And the number of students who enroll from the acceptance rate is kind of falling. The yield is falling. And some schools try to chase that with higher merit awards. And if they're kind of small and regional, that's a little bit of a red flag for us. But we're not experts.
So Amardeep asked, how does one calculate an ESC for international students?
Well, you kind of don't. Unfortunately, the net price calculators are not built for international families. I think they're so not built for them that there's kind of a risk in even using them. I always recommend to a family that they get in touch directly with the financial aid office and, see if they can get any information. But it's really hard for international students, unfortunately. No one has invented the tool yet.
What about for the profile, Jenny? I mean, you don't get an EFC per se, but the profile has a lot more information and it gives more places to provide details about a family's financial situation. Does that seem to help? Like colleges that offer profile, does that seem to help, or does it not really impact it?
In terms of the size of the award, or in terms of getting an initial
understanding
read?
what the family contribution is and what the college is, what your EFC is as an international student. I mean, you can run for international families, they can run through an EFC calculator and see if you are a domestic student, what your EFC would be. but that doesn't mean you're going to be awarded at the same level as a domestic student, but you can see what your EFC would be based on, your information.
Yeah, I think what can be really tricky, I know, Jeff and I were at Franklin and Marshall a couple of years ago, and we were having a discussion about this. And one of the issues with the international students on the profile is with their address, in that they could be read in the, let's say, in the metropolitan area of Bogota, right? And an assumption could be made about, what their lifestyle is costing them. And a student could be from a very different area of the city, a very under-resourced area of the city, and the profile doesn't pick up on that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, the financial aid officer, she wasn't a financial aid, she was an admission officer, but she works really hand in hand with her international students. And I was so impressed with her because she was saying, I knew for a fact once when information came in, there was no way that it was accurate. And so she said, I wrote to the student and said, do me a favor and make a video of your day, start to finish, and send it to me so that I can share it. Right. So it's just it's really tricky. I wish I had a better answer.
No. And Allison talks about the discrepancies in schools. There are private schools that, all schools use the FAFSA, right? Because that's for the federal, for domestic students or students that qualify. And then some of the private schools use the profile. And I don't know, are there any public schools that use the profile? There's probably a few,
There are
right?
a few, yes.
Yeah, but there's a huge discrepancy. Sometimes divorced families might do better by using a school that, what I call a private FAFSA only school. So I have a whole list of the private FAFSA only schools, because not only divorced families do much better with that, but business families, and my favorite are my ag families. You have a farmer who has, they usually have 5 or 6 different partnerships. They're in, this with their uncle and this with their cousin and all these things. Trying to figure all that out and put it all in the profile is near impossible. So we just kind of try to focus on the FAFSA only private schools because it's pretty clear cut. I can have families who qualify for a Pell Grant on the FAFSA and won't qualify for anything on the profile. It's that profound.
I want your list.
and home equity is another factor.
Yeah.
The FAFSA does not ask about equity in the primary residence. The CSS profile does. There are a handful of profile schools that don't look at home equity, just a few. But so that can also skew what the FAFSA award is compared to what the federal EFC is compared to the institutional EFC. I will say this though, and I know that's Cyndy, you qualified privates that use the FAFSA. Most FAFSA schools are not going to be as generous as the wealthier privates that use the CSS profile. Right. So a school meeting 100% of need using the profile may give you as generous award as a school meeting 70% of need using the FAFSA only. So a lot of factors to consider.
Yeah. So I see a lot of people are asking for this list that I have. It is in Guided Path. We put it in Guided Path. I'll put it on our website as well. I'll download it and put it in. But I wanted to have a shout out to Andrew. He's the one that said, yeah, it's in Guided Path. And that is true. We have it in Guided Path. So, but yeah, I mean, these are all these things. And that's why it's so important what you guys do on the data as you're aggregating this data and you're seeing these trends and these patterns that many of us don't see. We suspect, but we're not seeing those numbers like you are. So are we able to go in and see, well, this was true in 17, 18, 19? Your list just show the current year, is that right?
Yeah, so you'd have to have the prior versions of them, which, I mean, most people, I believe, download them, and then you'd have to manually compare. Jeff's got this panic look on his face as if I'm going to ask him to help me put this together. I can see him right now. Right now he's going like, it's application season during a pandemic. Don't even think about it.
We have enough time. We have a hard enough time compiling each year's chart.
Years, right.
Yeah, if
No, that's
anyone
fine.
wants to look at 3 years and compare, be my guest.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a great project for somebody else, definitely.
But again, actually, I mean, you can go back because we have the EFC calculator and guided path. You can go back and look at past years and you can pull some of that data. But I think it's very valuable that, you know, that you guys have put this together, and I'll post this as well on the website, just these numbers that you shared today, you know, that you gave me in terms of the ED and EA and things like that. So
Yeah. In terms of past years of data, something that I have noticed that frustrates me, and it's, you know, it doesn't happen very frequently, but it happens enough that I find it annoying, is very often when a school updates their common data set online, they remove prior years. And so if you wanted to go back to compare something, you can't. And I use that particularly like with transfer information to kind of get a sense of any trends for transfer students, because that's, you know, it's so hard to predict that. So, you know, if you see something online and you like it, I highly recommend downloading.
Can I jump in with one piece of advice for people using our charts? Part of what's valuable about them is that once you download them, they're sortable. So if you're working with a family who has a relatively high EFC, but who cannot afford $75,000 a year for college for each of their kids, and who really need to find schools that are generous with merit aid, you can sort our chart for the merit aid column, largest to smallest, and then you'll see the 150 schools that have the that have an average merit aid award of 15 or 18,000 or more. Same with need-based aid. So I hope that people are using the charts in that way to help you aggregate lists of schools that make sense for your students.
I totally agree with that. It makes it very helpful and easy, and it's always so beneficial to be able to pull data and sort it according to what your needs are. This family with 40K who wants to go to NYU or, you know, Case Western or whatever the case may be. So I appreciate that.